Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear viewers, welcome to a new episode of the Quran and Science. I'm your host, Tamer Mumtaz, and welcoming our dear professor, Dr. Zaghloul Al-Najjar, Head of Committee on Scientific Facts in the Glorious Quran, Supreme Council on Islamic Affairs, our dear guests, Brother Fuad and Brother Mustafa. And in this episode, we'll talk about the blaze of the sea, where it is mentioned in Surah At-Tur, verse number 6, and now we'll listen to the verse.
وَالْبَحْرِ الْمَسْجُورِ.
By the sea set on a blaze.
Professor Zaghloul, the blaze of the sea.
Blaze of the sea. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, most merciful, I greet you all in our Islamic way. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And I dare say that this phrase or this issue of the sea set on a blaze could not be achieved by man until the mid-60s, early 70s of the 20th century. And for the glorious Quran to mention this fact is a living testimony for every sane person that this book can never be the work of man. It is a testimony that the glorious Quran is the word of the Creator in its divine purity, and a testimony as well for the prophethood of Muhammad, peace be upon him, the seal of that long chain of prophets and messengers sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the guidance of man. The verse reads, وَالْبَحْرِ الْمَسْجُورِ, by the sea set on a blaze. Of course, al-masjur in Arabic means the thing that has been heated until it became red hot. And the mentality of the people at the time of revelation could not grasp this. How could the sea be set on a blaze? Water and fire are incompatible. Water quenches fire, and fire evaporates water. How can these incompatible entities coexist without one destroying the other?
Not only at their age, even in this age, it is difficult for us to...
Very difficult.
Yeah.
So Al-Bahr al-Masjur was taken by early commentators on the glorious Quran as a sign of Akhirah, because there is another verse in Surah At-Takwir which reads, وَإِذَا الْبَحَارُ سُجِّرَتْ, when the seas will be physically set on fire. But of course the context of Surah Takwir is all in the future, is all in Akhirah. But the context of Surah At-Tur is all in the present time. The surah starts by reading Wat-Tur, by the Mount of Revelation. And At-Tur is a mountain in Sinai where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addressed Moses, peace be upon him.
Nice.
And due to this great blessing, Allah has given that mountain. Allah has given the oath by it, although we know that Allah is above giving an oath to anybody. Wat-Tur, by the greatness, by the eminence, by the blessings of this Mount of Revelation. وَكِتَابٍ مَسْطُورٍ, and by the inscribed book. This may mean every single revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the guidance of man, or can mean the Holy Quran, because really all these previous revelations were finally integrated and preserved in the glorious Quran. وَالطُّورِ وَكِتَابٍ مَسْطُورٍ فِي رَقٍّ مَنْشُورٍ, in a parchment that is unfolded, meaning open to everybody, available to everybody. And this verse can testify to the fact that what's meant by the previous verse, the inscribed book, it really testifies to the fact that it is the Quran, because all the previous revelations came down on stone tablets to Moses, to Jesus, to Abraham, peace be upon them all. And it came in its entirety on tablets. The Holy Quran was the only revelation that came through al-wahy, or revelation, through Archangel Jibreel alayhi salam. And it was written down on parchment, on pieces of pottery, on pieces of wood, on pieces of bones, whatever was available, until it was collected, and the Arabs knew the paper industry, and they wrote it in books. So if it says في رق منشور, in an unfolded piece of parchment, this refers to the Quran, because the other books came on tablets. They were not written on parchment.
Cannot be folded, of course.
I beg your pardon?
The stones cannot be folded, of course.
It cannot be folded, yes. Yes.
Totally different media.
كتاب مسطور في رق منشور والبيت المعمور, the frequently visited house. And we don't know anything about the frequently visited house except through the sayings of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. When he asked some of his companions, أتدرون ما البيت المعمور? Do you know where is this frequently visited house? The companion said, Allah wa rasuluhu a'lam. Only Allah and his messenger would know that. He said, هو بيت في السماء السابعة. It's a house in the 7th firmament. يدخله في كل يوم 70,000 ملك. Every day it's frequently visited by 70,000 of the angels. فإذا خرج آخرهم لا يعودون. If the last one has come out, they don't come again. Other angels come.
Different
for every day.
70,000
Angels come from
come
every day. Yes.
SubhanAllah.
So Al-Bayt al-Ma'mur, the frequently visited house, is in the 7th firmament. And this is in our existence today. والسقف المرفوع, the highly raised canopy. This is the first firmament. The first sky. Yeah. All these are in our existing life. So Al-Bahr al-Masjur, the sea set on a blaze, must be in the current, present existence of ours.
So it came also in the stages of creation of the universe a long time ago, and it is there now.
What's that?
Al-Bahr al-Masjur, the sea on a blaze.
No, this came later.
Yes.
After the creation.
After the creation?
After the creation. Okay. So the Arabs couldn't understand what's meant by Al-Bahr al-Masjur. How could the sea be physically set on a blaze? So they said, let us look for a word in the lexicon of the Arabic language, for a word for al-masjur, that means something else other than heated to become red hot.
That was at the time of the Prophet sallallahu
At the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they said, we found another meaning of the word al-masjur, or the adjective al-masjur. This means that infilled with water and restrained from further encroachment over land. And they said, we found it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has filled the depressions of the earth with water, forming seas and oceans, lakes and ponds and the like, and has restrained this water from further encroachment over land, which was absolutely correct. Because nowadays we know that 97.5% of the total water of the earth, which is estimated at the range of 1,000 or 1,400 million cubic kilometers. 1,400 million cubic kilometers. Most of this water is in seas and oceans. And only a small fraction of it runs on land. And this is by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because only this 2.5% of water could have drowned the whole surface of the earth.
Runs on land in the form of rivers, right?
I beg pardon?
Runs on land in the form of rivers? In the form of rivers?
What do you mean by form of rivers?
Of rivers.
Of rivers. Of flowing rivers, you say.
Flowing rivers.
Flowing rivers, yes. I mean, the bulk of this 2.5% of water, if it was available on land, it would have drowned all the lands. So Allah has restrained most of this water as ice caps on the two poles and at the peaks of mountains. And some of this water is also restored in the ground so that they can be used by areas that do not have flowing rivers, called groundwater. And the flowing, you would be amazed. It would be amazed really to see that all flowing rivers do not contain more than 0.002% of the fresh water on land. So they said, we have found the meaning. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing his bounties on us by giving us this big expanse of land so that we can live on. And this big expanse of land is mainly controlled by the amount of water contained on the two poles and at the peaks of mountains.
So their explanation in that time was correct?
Yes,
also.
was absolutely correct.
Okay.
Absolutely correct. Because the thickness of ice at the southern pole reaches 4 kilometers. 4 kilometers of ice.
Thickness, the layer is 4 kilometers.
4 kilometers. In the northern pole, 3,800 kilometers. 4 kilometers. 4,000 meters, you see.
4,000 meters,
The thickness
yes.
of ice in the southern pole reaches up to 4 kilometers.
Okay.
And the thickness of ice on the northern pole, 3,800 meters. And this is an immense quantity of water. If this water was to melt, and it does not need more than an excess of 4 to 5 degrees centigrade in the temperature of the summer of these regions, it would melt. And it has been calculated that if this ice was to melt, it would drown the majority of the land. And this is not mere imaginations or fiction. In the history of the earth, we had phases when the sea encroached on more land than today, and we had phases when the sea was far lower than its present-day level. And the control in all cases is the amount of ice collected at the two poles and at the peaks of mountains. If this ice would melt, it would raise the sea level, and the sea would cover more land, and only a small part of dry land would remain. If the ice would increase, this means the sea level will drop down, and of course more land would be exposed. So they understood it in that way, which is absolutely correct. By the sea set on fire or set on a blaze, it did not come to their understanding at all. They said, Al-Bahr al-Masjur means a restrained sea. Allah has filled the depressed areas of the earth with water and has restrained this water from further encroachment over land. But after the Second World War, we came to find another explanation, which we may come to after the break, inshallah.
Okay, we'll go for a short break now and continuing with Professor Zaghloul Al-Najjar. Thank you.
Closing the Gap.
Why closing the gap?
In this program, Sheikh Yusuf Estes and Omar Dunlap are going to discuss how to bridge the gap between peoples of different cultures and orientations, the gap between males and females, Muslims and non-Muslims, the East and the West.
Human beings feel like that they're being slighted one way or the other. The gap between the youth and the elders, the gap between various status in working, the work field and education, and then trying to provide solutions for these particular problems.
Welcome back, dear viewers, and continuing our conversation with Professor Zaghloul Al-Najjar. You were saying in the Second World War, when we were talking about the blazed sea.
After the Second World War, scientists went down to study the bottoms of seas and oceans. And the main encouragement for this going down to bottoms of seas and oceans was the understanding that these bottoms are full of mineral wealth due to the fact that oceanic currents can push on the seashores and the oceanic shores manganese nodules, iron nodules, copper nodules, and the like. And of course, we, during the two world wars, we lived a time of purely materialistic attitude that was a culture of mass production that exhausted most of the reserves of these minerals on land. People were not living according to their needs, but they were excessive in satisfying their needs, and that's why most of the mineral resources on land have been exhaustively exhausted or severely exhausted. And of course they tried, we can go down the bottom of seas and oceans and try to find more mineral wealth. So they went down. For their surprise, they found that all oceans, including the Arctic oceans, are physically set on a blaze. Are physically set on a blaze. How come? How could the water and fire coexist without one obliterating the other?
So you're saying actually there is a blaze under
Actually on a blaze.
Subhanallah.
And as we said in another episode, volcanic activities at the bottoms of oceans and seas are several times greater than what we see on land. Although what we see on land is not something little, it's absolutely devastating. But by the grace of Allah, most volcanicity takes place at the bottoms of seas and oceans. After a lengthy study that started between 1945 and 1965, scientists came to realize that all oceans were actually created by deep rift systems. Two faults having their downthrows towards each other would cause the area in between to collapse, to go down. And as it goes down, it creates a depression. And this depression can be infilled with water to create a longitudinal sea similar to the Red Sea. And this longitudinal sea has got these deep rifts that penetrate the outer rocky layer of the earth completely and reach the zone of weakness, the asthenosphere, a zone in which the rocks are found in a semi-molten state.
Very hot.
At temperatures that exceed 1,000 degrees centigrade. Wow. So the magma come out easily. This is an easy vent for it. Come out easily and infill that depression. And of course it will meet water. So it will evaporate water. It will evaporate. And be slightly quenched. And the water vapor rises up to find that the higher levels of the sea are cooler. So they will condense and come back. They will cool the magma a little bit, but more magma can come out to keep the blaze going on. And one of the most striking features that has amazed all scientists is that at the bottoms of all oceans and at the bottoms of some of the seas, such as the Red Sea, water and fire can meet together without annihilating each other.
Subhanallah.
For the Quran to spell that out, a book revealed more than 14 centuries ago, to spell this fact out and give an oath by it, where it reads, وَالْبَحْرِ الْمَسْجُورِ, by the sea physically set on a blaze, is a living testimony that this book cannot be the work of man. It is the word of the Creator in its divine purity, the book that has been preserved in the same language of revelation for over 14 centuries, preserved by the will of Allah, word to word and letter to letter, and it contains that immense amount of scientific knowledge that testify to the divinity of the Creator, testify to the unity of the Creator, to testify to the might, wisdom and knowledge of the Creator, and at the same time remain an address to the people of our time, a testimony that this glorious Quran is not the work of man, it's the divine word and it's divine person.
Is there any possibility that one could overcome the other, or they would continue to coexist?
The two phases of water and fire.
No, it will go on like this until Akhirah, until the end of this world.
So the phases do exist together, side by
The
side,
two do
right
exist
now.
Yes, yes.
And they wouldn't overcome one another, because I think I read somewhere that one of the signs that the sea would be set totally ablaze.
But no, you see, if you remember in one of these episodes, I emphasized the fact that Akhirah, the last hour,
Yes.
has got its own laws.
Yeah.
It does not follow the laws that govern the present-day world. Al-Akhirah, as the Quran describes it, ثقلت في السماوات والأرض لا تأتيكم إلا بغتة. It will not come to you except suddenly. And suddenly means by a divine order. It does not need the systems of today. Does not need the laws of today.
Yeah.
No.
I think what we see today is just to make us believe that it could happen in any way.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
But
And I think
Professor-
Mustafa had a question.
Yes, the question before, the previous
yes.
question that we, I need some, if you allow us to, that you can talk to us about the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the speech that he said. I'm not sure exactly about the
I can
right
tell you
word.
the
You can
hadith,
tell me
brother.
about it.
Yes.
But there is a fire underneath the sea,
Under
and,
the
there's-
sea, yes.
and not to travel a lot in the sea.
Yes,
Is that
yes,
right?
indeed.
Yes.
The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may Allah's mercy and blessings be upon him, is quoted to have said, لا يركب البحر إلا حاج أو معتمر أو غاز في سبيل الله لأن تحت البحر نارا وتحت النار بحرا. You should not really ride the sea except for a noble cause, such as going for pilgrimage or for Umrah, the smaller pilgrimage, الحاج أو معتمر أو غاز في سبيل الله. Somebody going in the way of Allah, either for da'wah or for jihad.
Yes.
And he added صلى الله عليه وسلم لأن تحت البحر نارا وتحت النار بحرا. Because under the sea there is fire, and under the fire there is water. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not ride the sea even for once in his lifetime. How could he know this? Who would have told him this? Who at his time would have reached this conclusion?
And this hadith is sahih.
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 In
Definitely.
Bukhari.
I verified it,
Yes.
and I found it to be absolutely correct.
All right.
Absolutely correct. But you see, because of the meaning is strange. The mentality of the people could not grasp this. How could be fire below the sea and water below the fire? How could this happen?
But you didn't explain the water below the fire.
I will explain it in a minute. You see. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam neither rode the sea, let alone diving to the bottom of the sea. Nobody at his time would know this fact. That was not disclosed until the area between 1945 and 1965, when a very basic principle in geology came to being known as plate tectonics. Plate tectonics means that the outer rocky layer of the earth is fragmented by a system of rifts or faults into plates, and these plates float on the semi-molten zone, the zone of weakness. And with the convection currents below these plates, they drive these plates away from each other to create seafloor spreading, or they cause these plates to collide with each other to generate mountains and stabilize the continental masses. So, anybody with any logical understanding can see in this verse a living testimony to the fact that the Holy Quran cannot be the work of man. It's the word of the Creator in its divine purity, and also a living testimony to the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It took me years to understand what's meant by إن تحت البحر نارا وتحت النار بحرا. How come that under the sea water there is fire, and under the fire there is water? Only towards the end of the 20th century, scientists came to prove that the great quantity of water on land, 1,400 million cubic kilometers of water, all of that was gushed out through volcanic vents and actually came from the zone of weakness, from the semi-molten layer under the outer rocky layer of the earth. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Inna tahta al-bahri naran." We see that this magma oozes out gradually to create this blaze under the sea, and at the same time, still in the semi-molten zone, more water than has been gushed out, because these water vapors are still coming out in huge quantities with every volcanic eruption.
So
he
this
said,
magma still contains water.
Definitely. And that's why I said earlier, some of the secular writers say that the future wars will be for water, because the population is increasing and the number of water on land is limited, so they have to fight for water. They don't realize that water is part of the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on us. And if we worship Allah properly, He can bring forth from this semi-molten layer more water than what we need. But of course, being a secular, they calculated it within the framework of the human thinking.
Yes, in their materialistic way.
And what they have actually on land.
It's actually there.
Yes.
And that's why the Prophet said that. إِنَّ تَحْتَ الْبَحْرِ نَارًا وَإِنَّ تَحْتَ النَّارِ بَحْرًا. Below the sea water, there is fire, and below this fire, there is water.
But there's still water coming up.
There's still water coming up.
So how come we're not exceeding the water? The water is rising
because
every
it's
year?
evaporating also?
No, but you see, you have got... the water cycle is one of the testimonies, again, for the great wisdom of the Creator, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because this cycle is calculated very, very precisely. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is quoted to have said, ما من عام بأمطر من عام ولكن الله يصرفه. No year has got more rain than another year. ولكن الله يصرفه. So the companions were astonished. Said, O Messenger of Allah, we have drought year after year, and suddenly we have storms with plenty of water that can be drowning. How come that no year has more rain than another year? Only recently, scientists have proved that the amount of water evaporated from the whole earth is a fixed amount. 380,000 cubic kilometers of water are evaporated from seas and oceans, from rivers and lakes and ponds.
Year, annually.
Each year. From the respiration of animals and humans, from the respiration of plants.
This is approximate?
No, it's a fixed amount.
It's a fixed amount.
It's a fixed amount. And it comes back drop by drop. And nothing is lost, but with a new distribution. Allah will give more to a particular area and less to another area, according to His own plan. So the fact that we get more water coming from vents, probably this is compensating water that has been stored in the ground, or water that has been lost to outer space, or that has been frozen as ice at the two poles, so that the balance can always be there.
SubhanAllah. So, Professor, just before the end of our episode, because it's very close, you said the rifts, they form the shape of the seas and oceans?
Definitely. All oceans and most of the seas have been formed by deep rifting. Otherwise, how could you have these depressed areas? The average depth of the ocean is 4 kilometers. Some oceans have depths or deeps that go beyond 11 kilometers. So they have to be formed by such rifts, which Allah has given an oath by and said, وَالْأَرْضَ ذَاتِ الصَّدْعِ, by the earth that has its own rifts.
SubhanAllah. Thank you, Professor Dr. Zaghloul
Thank you very much
Al-Najjar.
indeed.
Thank you, Brother Mustafa, Brother Fuad. Thank you very much. Thank you, dear viewers. And we've come to the end of our episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Bum, bum, bum.